Candidates, we're going to try to make sure each of you get your fair amount of questions, and you'll have a minute to answer, and in 30 seconds for rebuttal and follow-ups. And if you're singled out for a particular criticism, I'll make sure you get a chance to respond. Now we're going to have each of the candidates introduce themselves, and so we have more time to debate tonight. We're going to ask them to keep it short. Here's an example. I'm John King from CNN. I'm honored to be your moderator tonight, and I'm thrilled to be in a state that reminds us baseball season is just around the corner. Congressman Paul, we begin with you, sir.
I'm Congressman Ron Paul, Congressman from Texas. I am the defender of the Constitution. I'm the champion of liberty. This shows the roadmap to peace and prosperity.
I'm Rick Santorum, and we have a lot of troubles around the world, as you see, the Middle East in flames and what's going on in this country with gas prices and the economy. And I'm here to talk about a positive solution to the problems that confront this country that include everybody from the bottom up.
I'm Mitt Romney, and there was a time in this country when you knew that if you worked hard and went to school and if you learned the values of America in your home, that you could count on having a secure future and a prosperous life. That was an American promise, and it's been broken by this president. I want to restore America's promise, and I'm going to do that. That's good enough. Yeah. As George Costanza would say, when they're applauding, stop, right? Yeah.
I'm Newt Gingrich, and I've developed a program for American energy so no future president will ever bow to a Saudi king again, and so every American can look forward to $2.50 a gallon gasoline.
Gentlemen, it's good to see you again. Let's get right started on the important issues with a question from our audience. Sir, please tell us who you are and then state your question.
My name is Gilbert Fiddler from Gilbert, Arizona. And I'd like to ask this question to all the candidates if I could. Since the first time in 65 years our national debt exceeds our gross national product, what are you going to do to bring down the debt?
Thank you, sir. Senator Santorum, let's begin with you.
Yeah, thank you, Gilbert. I've put together a specific plan that cuts $5 trillion over 5 years, that spends less money each year for the next 4 years that I'll be president of the United States. So it's not inflation adjusted, it's not baseline budgeting. We're actually going to shrink the actual size of the federal budget. And we're going to do so by dealing with the real problem. And here's where I differentiate myself with everybody else, including obviously the president. I actually have experience on tackling the toughest problems that we have in this country, and that's the growth of entitlement spending. Obviously, the first thing we need to do is repeal Obamacare. That's the one entitlement that we can get rid of. And that's a couple $2 trillion in spending over the next 10 years. But there's bigger issues. When I was born, less than 10% of the federal budget was entitlement spending. It's now 60% of the budget. Some people have suggested that defense spending is the problem. When I was born, defense spending was 60% of the budget. It's now 17%. If you think defense spending is the problem, then you need a remedial math class to go back to. Defense spending will not be cut under my administration, but we will go after all of the means-tested entitlement programs, Medicaid, food stamps, all of those programs, and do what we did with welfare. We cut the welfare, we cut spending on welfare, froze it, and then we block granted it to the states and gave them the flexibility to run that program the way they saw fit with two provisos. Number one, there would be a time limit on welfare and a work requirement. We were going to say that poverty is not a disability, that these programs need to be transitional in nature. And we need to do the same thing with Medicaid. We need to do the same thing with food stamps, all of the other means-tested entitlement programs. And unlike the Paul Ryan plan, I see I'm out of time, but unlike the Paul Ryan plan, we also will deal with Medicare and Social Security, not 10 years from now. But we have to start dealing with it now because our country is facing fiscal bankruptcy.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Romney, I'm wondering if that answer satisfied you. Just in recent days, you said this, quote, if you want a fiscal conservative, you can't vote for Rick Santorum because he's not. Did he answer your questions there?
Well, I'm looking at his historic record, which voting for raising the debt ceiling 5 different times without voting for compensating cuts, voting to keep in place Davis-Bacon, which costs about $100 billion over 10 years, a whole series of votes, voting to fund Planned Parenthood, to expand the Department of Education during his term in the Senate, spending grew by some 80% in the federal government. But I want to respond to Gilbert's question, which I think is a critical one. And that is, as you look at this country, I'm a guy who's lived in the world of business. If you don't balance your budget in business, you go out of business. So I've lived balancing budgets. I also served in the Olympics, balanced the budget there, and served in the state. And in all 4 years I was governor, we balanced the budget. Here's what I'd do at the federal level. I would divide all of the programs into 3 major places for opportunity to reduce costs. Number one, I'm going to go through every single program and ask if we can afford it. And if not, I'm going to say, is this program so critical that it's worth borrowing money from China to pay for it? And if not, I'm going to get rid of it. Number two, I'm going to take programs that are important, but that could be better run at the state level and send them back to the states as a block grant, and that includes Medicaid and housing vouchers and food stamps. These programs for the poor can be run more efficiently, and it can be run with less fraud and abuse at the state level. And then finally, number three, with what's left of government, I'm going to cut the employment by 10%, and I'm going to link the pay of government workers with the pay in the private sector. Government servants shouldn't get paid more than the people who are paying taxes.
Senator, the governor singled you out. Take a few seconds.
Well, the governor talks about raising the debt ceiling. There was a debt ceiling vote this summer, and the governor was asked the question whether he would have voted to raise the debt ceiling ultimately, and he said yes, because government has to pay their bills. We can't default ultimately. What happened the 12 years I was in the United States Senate, we went from the debt to GDP ratio, which is now over 100%. When I came to the Senate, it was 68% of GDP. When I left the Senate, it was 64% of GDP. So government as the size of the economy went down when I was in the United States Senate. Sure, I had some votes. Look, I think we all have had votes that I look back on. I wish I wouldn't have voted to No Child Left Behind. You're right, it led to education spending. That's why I've said that we need to cut and eliminate No Child Left Behind and education funding from the federal government, move it back to the local level where it belongs, where parents and local communities can deal with that. But if you look at my record on spending, on taking on entitlements, never having voted for an appropriation bill increase, you look at my record of never having raised taxes. Governor Romney raised $700 million in taxes and fees in Massachusetts. I never voted to raise taxes. Governor Romney even today suggested raising taxes on the top 1%, adopting the Occupy Wall Street rhetoric. I'm not going to adopt that rhetoric. I'm going to represent 100% of Americans. We're not raising taxes on anybody.
I'm sorry. Governor, please, quickly, I want to bring the congressman and the speaker into the conversation, but respond.
There were so many misrepresentations that it's going to take me a little while. Number one, I said today that we're going to cut taxes on everyone across the country by 20%, including the top 1%. So that's number one. Number two, I said, yes, we should increase the debt ceiling in this last vote, but only if we have a cut, cap, and balance provision put in place. Only in that case, and therefore I did not agree with the deal that was done in Washington. That was the wrong way to go. And finally, Senator, during your term in Congress, the years you've been there, government has doubled in size. You voted to raise the debt ceiling 5 times without compensating cuts in spending. In my view, we should not raise the debt ceiling again until we get compensating cuts in spending. A cut, cap, and balance approach must be taken.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, join the conversation, address Gilbert's question, and if you so choose, address some criticism you've received on this issue from this state's senior senator campaigning for Governor Romney. He questioned your credentials on fiscal conservatism, and he said when you were the speaker, earmarking became an art.
Well, when I was speaker, as I'm sure he remembers, we balanced the budget for 4 consecutive years for the only time in his lifetime. So I think that's a good place to start with Gilbert's question. We're meeting tonight on the 280th anniversary of George Washington's birth. If you go back and look at the Founding Fathers, they'd have had very clear messages. Hamilton would have said, you have to have jobs and economic growth to get back to a balanced budget. You're never going to balance the budget on the back of a highly unemployed country. And so I would be committed, first of all, to a program of jobs and economic growth. Second, the energy issue is enormous. The leading developer of North Dakota Oil estimated recently that if we would open up federal land and open up offshore, you would have 16 to 18 trillion, not billion, trillion dollars in royalties to the federal government in the next generation. An enormous flow which would drive down prices to $2.50 a gallon, would help us balance the budget, and would create millions of jobs. Finally, I agree generally with the need to reform government. I think that if we were prepared to repeal the 130-year-old civil service laws, go to a modern management system, we could save a minimum of $500 billion a year with a better system. And if we then applied the 10th Amendment, as Governor Rick Perry has agreed to head up a project on, I think we can return to the states an enormous share of the power that's currently in Washington, D.C.
Congressman Paul, you've questioned the fiscal conservative credentials of all these gentlemen, but particularly this week, Senator Santorum. You have a new television ad that labels him a fake. Why?
Because he's a fake.
Unreal, Ron. Unreal.
Congratulations.
Unreal. Thank you.
No, I find it really fascinating that when people are running for office, they're really fiscally conservative. When they're in office, they do something different. And then when they explain themselves, they say, oh, I want to repeal that. So the senator voted for No Child Left Behind, but now he voted for it, but now he's running on the effort to get rid of it. So I think the record is so bad, you know, with the politicians. And, nobody accuses me of not having voted for too much. They're always accusing me for not voting for enough. And I've been running in office off and on for a good many years. And over all those years, I've never voted for a budget deficit. I never voted to increase the national debt. Matter of fact, there's only one appropriation bill that I voted for, and that was for veterans. I assumed from the 1970s on that we were embarking on a very dangerous path, and we're involved in that danger right now. So this idea of being fiscally conservative now that we're running for office and we're going to repeal something that we did before, I mean, it loses credibility is what our problem is. So, and the one thing that I think should annoy all Americans is the voting for foreign aid. I mean, just think, their foreign aid packages, they're huge, and when the member votes for it, they don't say, well, this money's going to ABC because I love that country, but it's the principle of the way the government works. You vote for foreign aid because for some weird reason it's supposed to be good for America, but then it goes and helps all our enemies. That's what I disapprove of.
Senator Santorum, respond quickly.
Ron, the Weekly Standard just did a review looking at the national taxpayer unions, I think Citizens Against Government Waste, and they measured me up against the other 50 senators who were serving when I did, and they said that I was the most fiscally conservative senator in the Congress in the 12 years that I was there. My ratings with the national taxpayer unions were A's or B's. They were very high from the Citizens Against Government Waste. I got a Hero Award. I was a leader, as you know, on taking on tough issues, which is the entitlement programs, not just welfare reform, but I also worked on Medicare reform and Medicaid reform, and also was a leader on trying to deal with Social Security. And I did that not representing one of the most conservative districts in the state of Texas, but in the state of Pennsylvania, with the second largest per capita population of seniors in the country. And I can tell you, those seniors really cared about Social Security. Why? Because all my rich seniors moved to Florida and Arizona. And what's left in Pennsylvania is folks who relied on Social Security. And I was out there as a Republican senator, a conservative voting record, over a 90% conservative voting record from the American Conservative Union. By the way, Ron, you ranked 145th in the bottom half of Republicans this year in a conservative voting record from that same organization. We had a strong record in a tough state to be a conservative. If I can stand up in the state of Pennsylvania, which hasn't elected a Republican president since 1988, and have a strong principled voting record on issues that were tough in my state, senior issues. Imagine now, as a president of the United States, with a Tea Party movement and a riled-up conservative base, what we can accomplish in Washington, D.C.
Congressman quickly.
You know, that's always a cop-out when you compare yourself to the other members of Congress. The American people are sick and tired of the members of Congress. They get about 9% rating. But this whole thing about comparison of conservative votes, I think you make a very important point. I don't rate one at the top. If it's spending or on taxes, I'm at the very top because I vote for the least amount of spending and the least amount of taxes, which means that some of the conservative ratings, you have to realize, sometimes conservatives want to spend money too. When it comes to overseas spending, you vote for the foreign aid. Conservatives are quite pleased with spending money overseas, but if you're a strict fiscal conservative and a constitutionalist, you don't vote for that kind of stuff, and so you can't just go by the ratings.
As you can see, it's an important issue to the people in the audience. I think it's one of the reasons this race has been so volatile. Voters are looking and they're saying, which of these candidates can I trust? And each of you are trying to make your case to them. As you tried to do so, Governor Romney, you said recently that as governor, you are a severely conservative governor of Massachusetts. What did you mean by that?